Hello, I'm Zeinab Badawi. Welcome to the Emmanuel Centre in the heart of London for this Intelligence Squared debate, when we will be discussing a very difficult issue that indeed does go to the very heart of the Brexit debate engulfing the UK. Our motion is no backsliding on Brexit. Britain should prioritise controlling its borders over staying in the European single market. Now, you know, after that historic referendum result in June, British politicians have been grappling with what is arguably the most complex political challenge of our lifetimes. Yet, there is little consensus on what Brexit should actually mean. And then there are voices, powerful ones from within the EU, who warn British politicians that they won't be able to dictate the terms of Brexit in any case. And we have an excellent panel representing all those views for you, arguing for the motion. Douglas Carswell, the only MP for UKIP, the UK Independence Party, which of course firmly backed Brexit. Alongside him is the veteran Professor of Economics, Patrick Minford, who also advised Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher on economic policy. Against the motion is the former Conservative Minister for Business, Anna Soubry, and with her bringing an EU perspective is Alexander Stubb, who until last year was the Prime Minister of Finland. So that is our panel. Welcome to you all, panel. Let me tell you what's going to happen. We're going to hear from our four panellists, two for the motion, two against. And then after that, I'm going to open the debate to the floor. First of all, let us have our opening statements from the panellists. And speaking first for the motion, yes, please, Douglas Carswell, do go. No backsliding on Brexit. Douglas Carswell. Now, Douglas, you resigned as a Conservative MP in 2014, and then you stood immediately successfully for UKIP, the UK Independence Party. And you said that one of the main reasons why you entered politics was so that Britain could leave the EU. So please do give us your opening statement on the motion. Thank you.
Brexit means leaving the single market. We were always very clear about that in the referendum. It's what people voted for. And I think it would be profoundly wrong to pretend otherwise. But if we were to remain in the single market, we would be bound by a whole range of public policy making by officials within the institutions of the EU rather than those at home. It would preclude the possibility of us being able to enter into those trade deals and take back control of our trade policy, which was one of the fundamental reasons why we argued to leave the European Union. But leaving the single market does not mean not having access to the single market, and this is an absolutely fundamental point to make. Now, the title of this debate this evening invites us to see a post-Brexit settlement in terms of immigration or trade. Now, I happen to think that's a false choice. The idea that you must accept free movement of people as a precondition to be able to trade is simply not so. I happen to have here, to make sure that I roughly stick to the time, an iPhone. An iPhone designed in California, with chips from Japan, assembled in China, with software from India. And you know what? We don't have free movement of people with any of those countries. In fact, we don't have free trade agreements with those countries, which is part of the problem of being in the EU. Of course, we need to be able to control our borders. But as a founder member of Vote Leave, as UKIP's only MP, 100% of the UKIP parliamentary party, as someone who's campaigned to leave the European Union for 20 years, I can tell you we are not looking to close our borders. I personally would like to see an arrangement that means we have what you might call the free movement of workers, not the free movement of people. Now, the Maastricht Treaty conferred on every person in the European Union the idea of EU citizenship. That will go. But ponder the implications of free movement of workers rather than free movement of people, and many of the arguments on the other side begin to melt away. We're not going to have the idea of free movement of workers as part of a deal, but because it is in our interest as a country to have the brightest and the best from around the world to come here. This is about independence. It's not about ending interdependence, and the two are not mutually exclusive. Trade doesn't happen because of official fiat. It happens because people in different countries want to buy and sell from one another. The key to leaving the European Union, the prize that comes from leaving the European Union, is to conduct our own free trade agreements, and that means leaving the single market. Now, immediately after it happened, immediately after the referendum, many people said, it can't possibly work. You're not going to get a deal. Well, the rest of the European Union has a massive trade surplus with this country, worth some 70 billion a year. It's not going to be in their interest to restrict cross-channel trade from which they today are the principal beneficiaries. There are no restrictions on that trade today. I can't see them putting those restrictions in place. And now today we have in the White House, like him or not, a president who supports the idea of Brexit. The same pundits who covered the recent American elections often suggest that we Eurosceptics are backward-looking, old-fashioned, retro. Well, if we were so backward-looking and retro, how come we're not fading away, but we're now the majority view in this country? Maybe it's the European Union that is a product of 1950s ways of thinking. They imply that somehow those of us who want to leave the European Union are anti-Europe or anti-European. We're not. We're anti the idea of the European Union, a bureaucratic construct. They claim that we're against internationalism and cooperation. Absolutely not. The referendum result was close. No side can claim to have a blank check. We need a new consensus. We need to accept that we're leaving the European Union, and we need to recognise that if we do that, we can still be good friends and neighbours who cooperate with the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you. Next arguing against the motion is Anna Soubry. Now, Anna, Conservative MP, you were a very vociferous campaigner for Britain to remain a member of the EU in the run-up to the June referendum. And you recently co-founded the Open Britain campaign, calling for the UK to keep its membership of the single market. And until this summer, you were the business minister. So please do argue against the motion.
Well, thank you very much indeed. And ladies and gentlemen here in the hall, you'll forgive me that I'd like to just address in many ways the many tens of millions of people across the world who will hear much of this debate and make it very clear to them. This country is very much still an open country that welcomes people, whatever the colour of their skin, whatever their faith or their race. So let's now turn to the motion that's in front of you. There'll be no backsliding on Brexit, and I say that, as you know, as somebody who is a fierce believer in our remaining within the European Union. We have to honour the vote that was taken on June the 23rd. But I also want to say this, because I think it's really important. All of you that took part in that vote on June the 23rd will remember that there was actually one question on the ballot paper. And that question was, do you want us to stay, remain, or leave the EU? There were no sub-clauses to that. There were no other questions on the ballot paper about, well, do you want to stay in the single market? Do you want more sovereignty? Do you want fewer immigrants? Do you want to control our borders? It was a simple, straightforward, remain or leave the European Union. And as we know, 52% of those people who voted voted leave, 52%. If only it had been the other way around, ladies and gentlemen. Sadly, it was not. 52 leave, 48 remain. It's right that we should now debate how and on what terms we leave the European Union, but we should tread very carefully if we try to say that the majority of people that voted to control immigration. Because you see, Douglas's view of leaving the EU is very different, I would suggest, than the leader or the acting leader of his party. Because whether Douglas likes it or not, it was Nigel Farage, who you may remember, who stood in front, one of the darkest days in our nation's politics, who stood in front of a poster of a long line of people fleeing from terror and from war, seeking sanctuary somewhere else. And he said that that's what the EU was all about. He was playing to the basest of all prejudices, looking at people on the colour of their skin, of their race or their religion, as opposed to addressing the real issue. So let us also be very clear about this. We do control our borders. You may have been abroad recently. You may have travelled overseas out of our country. And you may remember that when you returned into our country, you had to show your passport. And every year, thousands of people are refused entry into our country. So we do control our borders. And of course, the other thing that we do is we control migration by the fact that overwhelmingly the majority of people who come to our country come here to work. So I welcome immigrant workers into our country because they come here to work, and I believe they add to the rich diversity of our country, and they have done for centuries, and we should celebrate that. So that is the case that I would make for why we should have the free movement of labour and indeed people. It is about work, but it's also about that free movement of ideas. So the benefits of the single market, ladies and gentlemen, as we now leave the EU, we would be absolutely mad, in my opinion, if we were to toss away membership of the single market. Our supply chains, like you saw with Nissan, they rely on that free movement of goods so that we can do trade. And without our membership of the single market, we will fall back on tariffs. And that will mean that the goods that we make in this country will cost far more when we sell them into the European Union. And that means, in short, that people won't buy them. And that means that we will not have the strong economy we have. So it's in our financial interests, ladies and gentlemen, not just for my generation, but for our children and our grandchildren, we stay a member of the single market.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Our second speaker for the motion is Patrick Minford. Now, you are Professor of Applied Economics at the Cardiff Business School in Wales, and you are one of the top economists, Patrick, in favour of Brexit, stating that the UK would be better off pursuing free trade deals and controlling its own migrant labour policy.
Thank you very much, Zeinab, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It seems to me the vote was pretty simply to leave the European Union in order to become a sovereign state, which I take it to be the object of Brexit. Then I think we have to start with the economics and remember that a sovereign state also rules the economy. We're not ruled by another state with its economic ideas about how we should do business. We rule ourselves. And the economics has always been central in this debate. And what was the economics of leaving the European Union? What was the European Union doing that made so many of us want to leave it? Well, I think there were three things. First of all, it's protectionist. It levies huge barriers to trade, worth about 20% on both food and manufacturing, through the so-called customs union and common agricultural policy. The second thing it did, it had a very intrusive regulative system, regulating all aspects of our economic and indeed wanting to regulate more of our political life in order to achieve the objects, apparently, of the single market. So the regulatory costs of the EU are very serious. And that was another big reason. Now, the third big reason concerned control of our borders. Now, people say, you know, there's a lot of talk about how people who want to control borders are apparently racist and so on, according to Anna, but I don't think this is about race at all or anything to do with, you know, intolerance. It's a theme that goes back a long way in economics, that you have to control your borders if you have a welfare state in order for people who are unskilled, who can't contribute very much to your economy, gaining a lot of welfare from your welfare state. And actually, we did a calculation that unskilled immigrants from the EU, of whom there are about 1.2 million, of whom about 1 million are adults, cost the British taxpayer each year £3,500 on average. And so what you have is a big third reason. And who paid these bills? It was the poorest people in our country, where unskilled immigrants settled. And this was a gross injustice. And of course, it was an important cost to the people who voted for Brexit. Now, how are we going to achieve Brexit, given that these are the costs? Well, there are two ways to do it. One is to do the so-called soft Brexit, which Anna Soubry favours, which is basically you don't leave the EU, basically. You just stick around in the single market with all these things that we don't like happening. No control over our laws, no control over our unskilled immigration. How can that be what the people wanted? How can it be consistent with the vote? And how can it be optimal, given that we still got all the same costs that we had before, that we didn't want? No. There's only one way to leave the EU, to become a sovereign state. You have to leave these institutions. You have to leave the single market. You have to leave the protectionism. And you have to abandon the free immigration, the lack of control. All those things I talked about. If you're going to leave, leave. And that means leaving all these things that cause costs, including the single market, the customs union. You have to go to free trade. Now, the last thing I want to say is this. Do we need to do a deal with the European Union selling into the single market? The answer is no. There's a world market out there in which everybody can sell. And the UK is no exception. We are a small country. We sell in millions of markets around the world. We don't need any trade agreements with any other country. And yes, as Douglas Carswell has said, an outward-looking migratory control, a green card system, but one that is intelligent in terms of controlling the costs of welfare of the people who enter our country and making sure that they don't batten down on poor people in our country.
Thank you very much indeed, Patrick Minford. So now the last of our opening statements, and speaking against the motion is Alexander Stubb, who until last year was Prime Minister of Finland. But Alexander, you've also had extensive experience across several government departments. Until this summer, you were Minister of Finance, and previously you've been Minister of Foreign Affairs and European Affairs and Trade. But you also have a personal connection to the United Kingdom because your wife is British, isn't she?
That's right, that's my claim to fame. My starting point, before I make my 3 points, is that I find it almost paradoxical that I have to stand here in probably the most international country in the world to make one of the most difficult arguments for why we as nations should cooperate. This is, after all, the country which, in my mind, has created the recipe of success based on 3 things. Number 1, democracy. Number 2, free markets. And number 3, globalization. And right now, this country is unfortunately on the verge, probably, to try to reject a few of those theses. Let me make my 3 points of why we should all vote against the motion here today. The first one is, I think a soft Brexit is the best way to go about it. And I will do everything in my power to try to make the transition towards Brexit as soft as possible. I think it will take 3 phases. Phase number 1 is from the referendum to the initiation of Article 50, whenever that may be. Phase number 2 is the actual negotiation of approximately 200,000 pages of secondary legislation. It is not going to be very easy to just dismantle 40 years of UK membership in the European Union. This will be extremely complicated from a legal perspective, it'll be very complicated from a political perspective, and it will be economically complicated as well. Phase number 3 is what we should start focusing on, and that is the future relationship of the United Kingdom with the European Union. If we go for a hard and abrupt Brexit, I think we will be pushing the baby out with the bathwater, and that is something we should not do. It will not benefit the United Kingdom, nor will it benefit the rest of the European Union. Now, I think Britain, and excuse me for using this term, should get a new deal. And I think this deal should be based on 3 pillars. Number 1, common foreign security policy. There is no European foreign security policy without Britain, nor is it easy for Britain to act without the European Union. Number two, justice and home affairs, because you cannot fight terrorism without the United Kingdom and vice versa. And then number three, to the argument here today, I think the United Kingdom should have as much of an access to the single market as possible. But that access, based on four freedoms, the free movement of goods, services, money and people, will also involve people. So in that sense, you cannot detach these four freedoms. But what you can do is detach some of the flanking policies. If you don't like structural policies, don't be part of it. If you don't like agricultural policy or energy policy or environment policy, don't be a part of it. But stick to the four freedoms. The whole idea that immigration is a bad thing for the United Kingdom, I think is counterfactual. You were the only country in the European Union in 2004 to allow for the free movement of labour from Eastern and Central Europe. And look at the country which has prospered since 2004. It was you. My third and final point is this. I think the British people should be given a second chance in 2019 or 2020. And this is the argument. The idea of detaching yourself from the European Union is probably the most important decision in recent British history. I think there should be a choice between the New Deal, which I call for to be as good as possible through a soft Brexit, and then the second option would be of membership. That is the final choice that the UK has to make, because, as has been said here before, we are in a situation whereby people did not know what they voted for. It is very easy to say Brexit means Brexit, but I have not found anyone yet at this stage who can tell me what Brexit actually means. Thank you.
So, audience, we've had the opening statements from our panellists. Before I throw this open to the floor, let me tell you how you, the audience here at the Emmanuel Centre, voted at the start of the debate before you heard any of our speakers on our motion. Let me remind you, no backsliding over Brexit. Britain should prioritise controlling its borders over staying in the European single market. For the motion, 20%. Against the motion, 64%. Don't know, 16%. I should say, however, that our audience here in London is not representative, of course, of the British electorate, because London, as we know, yes, London, apart from two constituencies, voted overwhelmingly to remain on the June the 23rd referendum, so no surprise there. So, can I see hands, please? Okay, fire away.
Thank you. I'm a bloody foreigner. Well, I've lived here for 46 years, and when I arrived, it wasn't just the microphones that didn't work, nothing worked. It was a dump. I come from my home in Canada via New York and Germany, and this was a poor country still recovering from the war. It's got richer every year since we joined the EU. I'd like the panel to tell me to what they attribute it, if they don't attribute it to globalization, foreigners like me and the EU. Thank you.
I have a question for Douglas. Now, given the performance of your colleagues in the House of Commons since the referendum, or looking back at the track record before the UK joined the common market, what makes you think that British politicians are that much more skillful than Brussels politicians?
Okay, Douglas.
I happen to think that UK politicians are hideously wrong on many, many things, but at least you can sack them. At least you can hold their feet to the fire, however imperfectly. The people who gave us the euro, which has caused mass unemployment throughout the European Union and consigned the lives of tens of millions of people in southern Europe to ruin and debt, you can't get rid of them. The Troika in Greece cannot be held to account. It's against ordinary people having the power to hold to account the people who govern them.
Okay,
it is not a force for global free trade.
Thank you. Let's take a clutch of questions now. Yeah, if you've got a microphone, stand.
Trump has just come into power because he's been against trade deals. He's argued that China, the import of cheap Chinese goods has strangulated the economy, and he's got a lot of votes and has now won from being against it and becoming protectionist. But you're now saying that we are going the opposite and we're going for trade deals. So that doesn't correlate with people being really angry and voting for Trump. I'd like to have your answer.
Thank you. There was another point there.
In respect to the Brexit campaign, one of your fellow travellers on the road to Brexit was one Boris Johnson, recently quoted as stating that Britain will make a titanic success of Brexit. Now...
Yeah, carry on.
Given that we all know what happened to the Titanic, I regard this statement by Boris as quite prophetic.
Thank you. Yeah.
This is a question to Anna and Alexander. Is the single market not integral to the whole point and idea of the European Union? And therefore a country to leave the European Union without leaving the single market would be like a couple getting divorced and still remaining living together.
Right. All right, so we had that question about people angry about globalisation, which doesn't really fit with the free trade, free, world that you're looking at. Patrick Minford.
Well, that's identifying Trump with Brexit. I mean, they're completely different things. The point about the Brexit campaign, 92% of our people who are workers in this country don't work in protected industries. 8% do. And yet, actually, every car constituency voted for Brexit.
Sorry, what does that mean? What does that mean?
Where do those facts come from? Seriously.
Well,
What on earth are you talking about? Because I think we've had the Brexit debate, right? People like me lost, and now we need to move on. But there was a very dangerous statistic that you used, which needs challenging. You said there were over 1 million unskilled immigrants in our country. That is not true.
EU
immigrants. That is not true because your definition of unskilled... Now, I didn't interrupt you, sir, so don't interrupt me. And the point I'm going to make is your definition of unskilled workers includes nurses. Nurses are some of the most skilled people in our country. And let us be very, very clear on this point about migrant workers from the EU. They come here to work, and they work very hard. And the simple question which needs answering is, when you've sent most of them home, as you intend to do, who is going to do the work that these people do?
I think that one of the reasons why there is a rising tide of anti-establishment politics insurgency in the Western world is precisely because there's a feeling that the elite has stolen democracy and the demos wants it back. And when I hear Alexander come here and say that we need to vote again, it worries me. Yes. Are we to be made to vote until we give the right answer, according to Alex? That is an outrageous statement for a former Prime Minister to make.
But I think...
Two
Certainly so.
comments. One is the comparison between Trump and Brexit. I think it's very difficult to compare the two, but I think the underlying themes are very similar. There is an element of rejecting of the other. There's an element of anti-globalization. I agree with you, Douglas. There's a feeling that over the past 25 years, when globalization has advanced, a lot of people have felt that they've been left outside and they don't have a say. And these are issues that need to be addressed. Okay. Now, the big difference here is UK and Brexit and Trump is that Trump, there will be a re-election in 4 years, but Brexit means Brexit and you're out for good.
Was it just one sentence?
Alexander said that we needed to vote again and the choice should be between EU membership or the New Deal. What kind of Kafkaesque choice is that?
Yeah, who's got the microphone? Stand, please. Yeah.
So my question is not on the EU itself, but on representation. So obviously Brexit does mean Brexit, but my question is the proposition to Douglas and to Patrick, how do you represent 48% of the people by pushing for a complete severance of ties from the EU?
Okay, thank you. Who's been waiting for a long time? There, okay.
Good evening. I'm very grateful to Mr. Stubb for offering me and those who voted like me a second chance to rectify the mistake that we made, but I voted to leave the European Union, and whatever flows with that flows with it. And I'd like to pick up Anna Soubry on a disgraceful slur-type comment that she made at the start. And I've heard this said many times about how we control our borders, and anybody, the implication being anybody who has concerns over borders is somehow racist. And I'll make this last point. 1 million people entered Germany over the last 15 months, much to the concern of many of the residents. In 6 years' time, if we stay in the European Union, allowing for the transitional arrangements, every single one of them people will be entitled to settle here.
All right, thank you. You will get a chance to, but I noticed I will come to you for that, because you have a right of reply, yes. But I just want to come to Radek Sikorski, who was Foreign Minister of Poland until last year, who I've spotted in the audience there. And just picking up on that particular point there, because 850,000 Poles in the UK, and we've had a lot of complaints from your government and also from the ambassador here in the UK about the rise in xenophobic attacks and comments about the Poles in particular.
I was myself a refugee in this country and was very grateful to get protection here from martial law in Poland when I needed it. I'm now a migrant worker. And just on a point of fact, if you want to get rid of me, send me back to Poland, you don't need to leave the European Union. It's enough that I, for 3 months, become a burden on the public exchequer, and you can then do that under the existing treaties. Secondly, I really don't believe that Britain needs to recover its sovereignty, because if you weren't sovereign, you wouldn't have had this referendum. In Poland, we know something about losing sovereignty, and it's somewhat offensive to hear it in this way. Thirdly, I would still like to back the underdog in this debate, because much as I agree with Alex that, this is a big experiment that Britain is embarking upon, I think the politics of this country are such that they will have to leave both the single market and the customs area. My proposal would be that Patrick Minford's vision of a freewheeling, free-trading Britain should be tested. And perhaps Britain will again be pioneered, just like she was in the 1980s when she reversed the course of history by starting privatization. If your model works, we will be following you. If it doesn't, then in a generation or so, 15, 20 years, then you can have your second referendum and correct what I believe to be your mistake.
Thank you very much indeed, Radek. But Anne, I'm going to come to you for a right of reply, because that question there about don't paint people who want to control their borders as racist.
Well,
but you didn't say that.
Yeah, everybody in this room heard exactly what I said. And so I do take objection, because I didn't say that anybody who wanted to control our borders or indeed reduce immigration was a racist. I never said any such thing. I will tell you this. In my county of Nottinghamshire, there has been an 18% rise in hate crime. People who have come here to work, sometimes born and bred in our country and second or third immigrants, have found themselves being subjected to foul racist language and the sort of comments which are not acceptable in any society. Can I just say to the young man over there who makes a very good point, and this is the point I really also want to make, is about we have to move forward and we have to bring people together and we have to heal huge divisions that have occurred in our society, and don't underestimate them. 48% of people voted to remain in the EU, and we need to hear them, bring them with us as we now get the best deal.
Yeah, OK, Patrick Minford, just first of all.
Listen,
I like the comment about a civilized debate, and I do think we should move on. And I like very much what Mr. Sikorski said, because exactly right. In the 80s, we charted in this country, and that was what improved our economy massively in the following 2 decades, big reforms of this economy under Mrs. Thatcher. So I'm very happy to be judged on what I regard in Brexit as the next stage in our free market movement of reform and supply-side reform, because what the other side forgot to say is there may be a market of 500 million in the EU to whom we will continue to sell, but there's over 6 billion people in the rest of the world who are kept out of the EU by EU protectionism and illiberalism.
But you said you would, hang on, you said you would use taxpayers' money to subsidise British businesses that would suffer as a result of us leaving the single market.
You find it very hard to understand any good economics.
Free market. What absolute nonsense you say.
You find it very hard to understand economics, but what you have to understand...
I'm now patronising.
Thank you. Douglas, briefly. Could you answer then the question from the young teenager about how do you represent...
You might have been older than that.
Well, I don't know, sorry, the young...
Mr. Sikorski, I thought you were being referred to as a young teenager there.
No.
But addressing your point, I agree.
I'm sure he wouldn't mind. No, the young man who said, how do you represent those 16 and 17-year-olds, a lot of them who would have liked to have remained in the EU, but they didn't have the vote.
If you look at the figures, you'll actually find that the Remain side got more votes from over 60s than they did from people in their 20s. Actually, there are an awful lot of people of different age groups.
Right, though. I thought the figure was 60%.
There's a study that's been done, which has then been confirmed by the LSE, that as you go through the age groups, the young voted much more heavily to Remain, and as you go up the age groups, older people...
doesn't preclude what I was saying. Okay. What I was saying is that there is an enormous amount of support for Remain amongst older people and for Leave amongst younger people.
Let's go to the floor and I'll come back to you. Microphone, yeah, lady here. Oh, sorry, gentlemen, I do beg your pardon. Sorry, couldn't see. Lights in my eyes, yeah.
It's all right, teenager here.
Is he foreign as well?
No backsliding on Brexit. Britain should prioritise controlling its borders over staying in the European single market. Now, in danger of actually properly addressing the motion, I'd like side proposition to actually explain what they mean by controlling our borders. What specifically has been wrong with our borders up to this point, and what are they going to change that would so dramatically affect how we are a member of such an important part of our economy and the global economy?
Thank you.
Good evening. I'd like to take exception to something that Douglas Carswell said, that we all knew that the UKIP and the Leave campaign had specified exactly that we were going to leave the single market. I think that we were told there could be a Canadian deal, there could be a Swiss deal, there could be a Norwegian deal, there could be any sort of deal. And I think the reason we should be asking for a second referendum when it comes to what sort of deal we actually get is we knew that we wanted to exit, but we don't know where we're going.
Okay, thank you. Who's got the microphone here? Yep, go ahead.
It's to Alex. Can I remind you that David Cameron actually went to the EU, tried to get a deal, came back with nothing. Then we had the referendum. Can I also say something that as hopefully it will all go through in Article 50 and we'll leave, it's exciting times ahead for us. We're part of the Commonwealth. Africa has the fastest growing middle class. It's growing at 20%. And I think we can do a lot more deals with the Commonwealth, and we've had our hands tied.
I should just say Article 50, of course, is what the UK has to trigger in order to begin the process to leave the European Union. Yeah?
I wanted to know if the poor people are the ones who are feeling the brunt of immigration and are the ones who are losing their jobs to low-skilled workers, etc. Why is it that the areas with the highest levels of migration are generally the ones that voted to remain?
Yes. Okay. Yes.
With respect to the lady who asked the question, if she thinks there's any doubt as to whether or not the vote was about leaving the single market. We were being criticised precisely because we had established a very clear position that a vote to leave the European Union was a vote to leave the single market. It is deeply disingenuous to suggest that that wasn't what it was about.
But it was to leave the single market as a member.
Correct.
Of the single market, not necessarily precluding, in your view, and other people who thought like you, continuing access in some shape or form to the single market.
To be
and
in
that
the
may have been misleading.
To trade with the single
exactly.
market.
But that is the thing that a lot of people now are questioning, whether even that is possible.
No, but that's absolutely elementary.
I'm just saying. There was also a question, I think, about David Cameron trying to get a deal on the free movement of people from within the European Union and so on, mention of Africa, the burgeoning middle class and all that. And what about more migrants from the Commonwealth rather than the European Union then? Because, of course, Britain has got huge ties with Commonwealth countries.
What I would change would be the control of unskilled immigrants. That's the point. That's where a civilized country has to have control, because skilled immigrants pay their way. And that always was confused by the Remain camp. They said immigration, is great, which of course on average it is.
So you like a point system, for instance?
Exactly. It's about the control of unskilled entrance into our welfare system.
Okay. Yeah, so who are going to clean the lavatories then in our hospitals? Who is going to pick the fruit and the vegetables in the fields of this country? Because I still want to know what the definition of unskilled is. Okay. There are hardly any unskilled jobs now in our country.
I will tell you the answer in 2 words. You have a deal with migrants whereby they don't bring in dependents, which is what costs the welfare. That's what costs the welfare. And she's not listening to it.
You said workers come in, clean the lavatories, pick the fruit and the berries, but don't bring your families.
Yes.
They don't bring their families.
That's the point. And that's the system that works.
50% of people in Boston, especially Polish people in Boston, are fit young men.
Okay.
We need migrant workers and we should welcome and value them.
Very quickly, then I'll go to the floor.
This is getting so heated. But yes, I'll try to lighten it up. Douglas, we have to be careful with the US-UK trade agreement, especially about the abbreviation, because if it's US-UK, it's you suck agreement. And that's no good.
Stupid remark.
I think the core of the matter here is, for all of us, is the free movement of people and then the single market. That was the motion that we were supposed to address. And I agree with the young gentleman. We have not yet been able to prove what is wrong with free movement, and that is because we keep on mixing two things. We talk about uncontrolled immigration or even asylum seekers on one hand, and then either skilled or unskilled labor belonging to the European Union on the other hand. That's one issue that needs to be addressed. And I simply don't see the evidence what has gone wrong with that.
Okay, thank you. Who's got the microphone?
There's an assumption that being associated with the European Union continues to be a good thing by those who wish to remain, and yet they forget that over the course of the time we've been involved, it's been an increasingly sclerotic organisation.
Right, well, do remember the motion, please. No backsliding on Brexit. Controlling our borders is more important than access to the single market.
Hello. I shan't start by stating my nationality because it's frankly irrelevant. My question is, does it not seem rather vulgar to the panel that we should constantly be obsessing over economic interest and we should allow it to take primacy over all other things? Are there not things which are perhaps more important than our immediate economic interest?
Okay, thank you. Douglas Carswell.
We're invited to think of this as a choice between economic prosperity or freedom and independence. I believe the two actually go together. The most free and liberal and independent societies around the world are the most prosperous. And in the future, those countries that succeed and flourish will be those that manage to be both independent and interdependent. Now, the EU, I believe, is failing. It's the only continent on the planet, with the exception of Antarctica, that isn't growing. It's in more than just a funk. It's in a fundamental and, in some cases, an absolute malaise. Why? Precisely because the European project is about trying to organise the affairs of tens of millions of people by grand design. And that doesn't work. I believe that if we leave the European Union, we will prosper and thrive. You don't need to be in a political union with tax-free technocrats and unelected bankers running your affairs to be good neighbours and to be open and free and liberal.
And just, where's the microphone? One more.
Thank you very much. I would just like to ask Anna Soubry. You mentioned a rise in hate crime. Now, everyone in this hall and everyone on the panel is disagreeing with each other, but I'm perfectly certain that we all agree that we bitterly regret it. But I don't see the relevance of that to this debate either. Because are you saying that if we stay in the single market, the hate crime will go back in the bottle? Don't you think it's because your previous Prime Minister called a referendum? That's what's risen the hate crime. You can't change it now.
Okay.
I met my Chief Constable in Nottinghamshire, and she was very clear. A rise just at this moment, 18% higher than this time last year. And she said, this is the words of the Chief Constable, who is not political and has no views on Brexit. She said that there was a direct correlation between the rhetoric and the language used in the EU referendum debate that was continuing in a county like mine.
Right. Got to the end of the debate. Before I announce the final vote, to see which side has won the most votes, let me remind you, the audience, how you were thinking before the debate started. So, no backsliding on Brexit. Britain should prioritise controlling its borders over staying in the European single market. The pre-debate results, again, for the motion, 20%, against 64%, don't know, 16%. And now the final result after the debate, for the motion, 39%. You've gone up. Against, 59%. You've gone down by 5 percentage points. The don't knows are down to 2%. So that was a swing of minus 12%. So, in a sense, congratulations to this side against the motion because you maintained your lead, but also congratulations to you because you got quite a lot of votes. You managed to influence some thoughts. So it's been a lively debate. I hope we've thrown heat as well as light on a very, very difficult issue. Thank you to all our panel, to you, the audience here at Emmanuel Centre, to Intelligence Squared. From me, Zeinab Badawi, in the Emmanuel Centre in London, goodbye.